With ray tracing becoming more and more mainstream as years go by, with titles like Indiana Jones and The Great Circle having no option to turn it off, it would be so cool to have the ability to go to these old titles and literally just flick a switch and turn ray tracing on. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you that that's entirely possible, with almost every game you can think of going from this to this in a click of a button. Join me in finding out how good it is, if it improves the visuals in a meaningful way, and how demanding it is on performance. Before we get into that though, I need to thank today's sponsor, Instant Gaming. Instant Gaming is a website that sells digital games with massive discounts across all platforms such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo. What sets Instant Gaming apart is that it's not a marketplace, and therefore games are directly sourced from authorized resellers. This means that you never have to worry about a dodgy game key that doesn't work. If you're a Spider-Man fan like myself, then you'll be happy to hear that Instant Gaming has Marvel's Spider-Man 2 for an incredibly lower price than on Steam. Before applying tax, the price of the game is £36.77 in my region. Besides brand new games though, I use this site a lot for retro games as well, as it's basically an all year round Steam sale. Like all of the Resident Evil titles have prices as low as under £3. Same with Fallout, Assassin's Creed, and Final Fantasy. If you're interested, then use the link in the description or the pinned comment in order to support the channel while saving your money on great games. Now back to the video. The easiest way to add ray tracing to your older games is through ReShade. We have used this program extensively on the channel so far to add things like vibrancy and anti-aliasing. To actually get the ray tracing shaders that we're going to be using, there are two notable names, Marty and NiceGuy. For starters, I'm going to be testing Marty's one. Unfortunately, you need to be one of Marty's Patreon in order to get access to the shader, but don't worry as we will go into free alternatives later in the video. Before we explore it, we obviously need to get it installed. This is not going to be a video tutorial as there are many videos out there that do this already way better than I could, but I will go over how to properly use the shader and what to look out for. You need to install ReShade like you usually would, and then grab Marty's shader from his Discord, and then drag and drop the files inside the ReShade shaders folder within your game directory. For pretty much every game that I covered in this video, what I did was convert it from DirectX to Vulkan using DXVK. Now the main reason for switching is that the shaders don't work properly on DirectX 9. The other reason you might want to switch to this is because you're going to need the extra performance in order to run the ray tracing, and that's what DXVK can offer. Stuff like GTA 4 for example runs pretty poorly without this translation layer. It's also extremely easy to install DXVK. All you need to do is grab it from their GitHub and then find the graphics API for your game on something like PC Gaming Wiki, and then drag and drop the right DLL file correspondent to that API into your game directory. DXVK will be linked down in the description along with everything else in this video. Also, no matter what graphics card you're on, you can try this out yourself as you don't need an RTX card. You do still need a powerful graphics card however, since the shaders are quite performance heavy, which we'll get into later. I started out with trying Grand Theft Auto 4. To get the shader enabled, what you need to do is open the ReShade menu and turn on both the immersive launchpad and the RTGI shader. You also need to make sure that launchpad is placed above RTGI so that it all works properly. Essentially what the launchpad does is just give the shader the necessary data to work with. If this looks weird or doesn't work at all, then you may need to adjust the depth buffer. The display depth shader will show you if it's working properly. If it's upside down, cropped, or just a black screen, then you need to either change the depth buffer settings within the add-ons panel, or you need to do something specific to your game which you'll need to search up. For example, for Max Payne, you need to disable SMAA in order to get it to work. I was really confused at first when trying it in this game because it looked really bad. The lighting was okay, but there was light bouncing off of the polygons of the models themselves, and it made the game look way worse. However, then I found out that inside the launchpad settings within the ReShade menu, there's an option called Smooth Normals, and enabling this fixed all of the problems. As you can see, all of the blocky patches are now nice and smooth as they should be. After this, GTA 4 started to look a lot different. This scene, for example, inside Roman's garage perfectly displays how well this shader works. So by default, the car shines its headlights onto the wall, yet stuff like these lockers do not really react that much. It's almost like the headlights are pretty much firing a light ray and then stop as soon as they hit the wall. Also, behind the car is a barrel that hardly looks part of the scene due to there being no shadow or transition from the ground. Now with the shader on, light very clearly starts to bounce around the room and makes the lockers react to it, and then also bounces off the light towards the car, making the whole room receive a little bit of light. The barrel behind the car is also now casting a shadow due to the bounce in light, and it looks way more part of the scene. Now obviously I'm no expert on lighting, but side by side I think everything within the scene blends a lot better with ray tracing on. Now the main downside is in a lot of these older games they would often bake the lighting into textures or make the scene look on purpose a certain way. So when you add these ray tracing effects, it can sometimes unintentionally make the scene very warm and ruin the atmosphere. This will be especially noticeable in darker toned games later on in the video. Now I got Nico to stand in front of the headlights to see if the shadow being casted behind him would change at all, and whilst it didn't, the main thing that I noticed that was better about the scene is things like his shoes. They are clearly now reflecting light back onto the floor, making him look truly part of the world. The default in comparison is extremely harsh. I was super impressed with this and was dying to try it out in more games. I came up with the pretty weird idea to try it on Borderlands 2, but the results weren't half bad. It was a perfect example though at how adding ray tracing to any and every game is not always a good thing. For example, I think the original looks a whole lot better here. For example, the Dr. Z sign just reflects much more natural light in the original, whereas the ray tracing is a bit too extreme for my liking. Here is Dragon's Dogma with a shader on. This game is an incredible RPG that has a very harsh 7th gen look to it, with the lighting being extremely basic. What I did for this game was layer on more effects to see how good I could get the game to look. I added sharpening, MXAO, and fake HDR. I also disabled the game's FXAA anti-aliasing and used Marty's SMAA one instead. Now looking back at this footage, I don't really like the fake HDR setting all that much, but the rest of them, I think they combine all together to give this older title a much needed makeover. Now of course the purists out there will cringe at the idea of this, but as someone that loves keeping everything as the devs intended as well, I still find the ability to do this much tweaking so damn fun. It's also extremely important to do less is more. Making the image way too contrasty, sharp, or vibrant can just totally kill the art style. Now I'm sure many of you wondering what the performance is like. Well, it's pretty rough. Dragon's Dogma went from an average of 148 FPS all the way down to 65, with 1% lows going to below 60. This obviously is a huge deal breaker for most, and for context, my specs are in the bottom corner of the benchmarks to give you an idea of how your machine might handle it. Now killing the art style is exactly what the shader done to Dark Souls 1. Just on the surface though, it got a major facelift from the shader, as the game by default is extremely flat. Things like the bonfires, lanterns give off such a nice glow, and the colour that reflects is way more realistic to the original. For example, the lanterns on the wall now give off a fiery orange colour rather than the really cool bright light that they gave off in the original. The thing is though, Dark Souls is meant to be a cold world, and the side by side shows just how warm and cozy it becomes. Also, every game's UI reacts really poorly to the ReShade effects, so opening menus will make the world behind it show through. You can set up a hotkey to disable the shader when you open the menus, but there is a much better way to do it that isn't too hard to set up. Like here in Dark Souls, you can see in the bottom left, as I drag over the fence here, you can see that the shield becomes almost like translucent and also gives off some glowy effects in the world as well. The way we're going to fix this is with an add-on within ReShade. It's important that you don't do this in multiplayer games because add-ons can tend to mess with the anti-cheat. So here within the menu, as you see, I have the RTGI shader on. And then if I go into the add-ons menu, this is the add-on that we're going to be looking at, the ReShade Effect Shader Toggler. To get this add-on, you just need to tick it during the installation process. Again, make sure you're using the add-on version of the installer, not the regular ReShade version. If you want to put this add-on on top of an already existing ReShade installation, then you can do that by just running the installer again. Now this add-on may seem really daunting and confusing at first, but it's actually really simple, as you can basically ignore most of the UI elements. So all you want to do is open the menu, and then here at list of toggle groups, drop down this menu, and then hit new. Inside of this, set this to active, and then click settings. Now in here is a list of all of the different shaders within your game. What we want to do is go down to the bottom of the list, as this is usually where the UI is. Basically, this is all the pixel shaders within the game, and what we want to do is find the UI one and double click it. Double clicking it will make the ray tracing shaders basically ignore that specific pixel shader. So as you can see, I've opened up the menu within Dark Souls, and you can see that my character is showing behind the UI, which if I turn off ray tracing, you'll see that that's not how it's supposed to look. So as you can see, this bottom one seems to have worked, but it's also removed the ray tracing, so this is not the UI one. As you can see, the preview panel here can help you get an indication of what the shader's actually disabling. So this one's actually working at removing the Estus flask, so we're going to double click this one. And we just make our way up until we find another shader. So as you see, this one right here removes my character from the menu, fixes the bottom left as well, and also the ray tracing is still working. So we're going to double click this one as well. And as far as I can tell, these are the only two that I need to enable within Dark Souls, but this is different for every game. So as you can see now, if we go back in game, everything looks just how it did, except the UI is now completely opaque like it should be. If we open up the use items menu, as you can see, we now cannot see our character. Basically every menu is working perfectly. You may find that if there's a game that has UI elements that are not shown by default here, like pop-ups, then they may not work. Now let's compare this ray tracing shader to the free alternatives that I mentioned earlier. First off, here's the default look of the game, then followed by Marty's RTGI shader, and then Quark Turbo GI, and then finally NiceGuy's lighting. Now although I just showed you 3 shaders, I'm only going to focus on Marty's and NiceGuy's, as NiceGuy's one is more well known, but it's also easier just to compare 2 shaders. You'll realize that this NiceGuy's lighting is actually really basic compared to the Marty's one. NiceGuy does actually do a complete ray tracing pack that's paid, but I didn't get it for this video as I wanted to try the free alternative to what a paid one looks like. This subway corridor was also a perfect example of how much a double-edged sword it can be. For example, this is supposed to be a dark, gritty grey area, but if we turn on Marty's RTGI shader, it becomes all warm and cozy again. But in the top right, the lights reflecting onto the walls add such a nice detail to the scene. Reducing the vibrancy by at least 3 will make the scene a lot closer to the original, which is great, but if we just use NiceGuy's lighting instead, it's way more subtle and not as impressive, and those light reflections on the wall kind of disappear, but it adds tiny little details to bring the scene more to life. Like Max specifically, his jacket gets some much needed ambient occlusion. Whilst NiceGuy's lighting isn't as impressive as RTGI in terms of technology, it's way more vanilla friendly in the way that it doesn't really hurt the original style of the game. It's also way better on performance. From vanilla, it only reduced my average frame rate by a single frame, and not much off of the 1% lows either, whereas RTGI more than halves your frame rate. I think for me personally, RTGI is something I would turn on, look around a bit, maybe take a screenshot, but then turn off for general gameplay, whereas NiceGuy's, whilst extremely subtle in comparison, adds nice little details for very little loss, so I see myself using this more for general use cases. I wondered though, how do these methods of ray tracing stack up to the newest remastering tool on the block, RTX Remix? Well, it's not even a competition. Staying close to the original look goes totally out of the window, and what replaces it is reflections and lighting that totally transform the experience. I want to set expectations as this is in no way transferable to your favourite games, as modders need to still meticulously comb through the game in order to change the properties of each object and texture. Whilst it makes it extremely easy for modders to remaster older titles using this, it's still going to take an awful amount of time to get full remaster projects. This one and a lot of the other RTX Remix projects are just a handful of missions completed. RTX Remix basically lets the developers in on more data for the game, and is closer to having in-engine tools than most things out there. Once all the hard work is done though, the results speak for themselves. Unlike the ReShade shader that doesn't know what is metal, wood, or plastic, Remix has given the modders the tools to choose that kind of information. That's why the metal bars in the train station actually look metallic, and Max's jacket, for example, looks like proper leather as it reflects everything off of it. It's a shame though that at default settings, I was getting as low as 30 FPS from the 240 FPS cap that I was at previously. I lowered my resolution to 1080p, which was recommended by the modder, and then I also used DLSS balance preset, which got me up to 60 FPS. I also turned off ray reconstruction. It gives you frames back, but it also kind of looks better in my opinion, as this kind of tech can look really messy at times. There's also OpenLara RTX. This one is incredible. To be honest, the base game already looks and runs amazing on PC, similar to Max Payne, but man, seeing it with real-time ray tracing is like seeing it for the first time again. And that is the exact reason why this kind of tech excites me so much. Being able to take a game that you already know inside out and then see it in this brand new light will be great. Here's a side-by-side of vanilla, RTX Remix, RTGI, and NiceGuy lighting. I think RTX Remix obviously blows it out of the water in terms of ray tracing, but I also do think NiceGuy and RTGI look pretty decent. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more tinkering and different mix of techniques that you could use to transform your retro games in this way. But for now, I think we had a pretty fun overview of the different methods and results. My final thoughts on this is that I think you should give NiceGuy's lighting a try. Whilst it's not as crazy as the ray tracing like the RTX Remix, it's such a nice little bump in lighting fidelity that can elevate an already great experience in your old or newer titles. If you want something seriously transformative though to have more fun with, then Marty's shaders is great, as well as RTX Remix. Marty shader is great though because it can be enabled in pretty much every game that you can think of, meaning your favourite games can be seen in a new light, and you don't even need an expensive RTX card, which is great. Now RTX Remix is still too early on to fully enjoy, but on ModDB there are quite a few demos and experiences for you to try out. Ones I haven't showcased in this video are Midnight Club 2, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and Mafia 1. I'm sure in a few years this will be flooded with fully ray-traced retro games, or at least I hope it will. There is already a project in the works that adds ray tracing to the entirety of Half-Life 2, for example. If you know of more cool stuff that you'd like me to check out, then please do let me know in the comments. Also, a big shout out to all the members here on YouTube or Patreon. They help keep the channel alive, and you can do the exact same thing for just £1 a month. Just click the join button below the video or find the link in the description to become a YouTube or Patreon member, depending on which one you prefer. If you enjoyed taking a look at interesting ways to relive older titles, then how about you take a look at the video on the left where we explore texture packs for emulators, or the video on the right which is similar concept but for CRT shaders. See you over there.